Hi, good morning for some of you and good afternoon for others, and welcome to an introduction to design thinking, hosted by the RISE Innovation Committee and presented today by committee co-chair Austin Tucker. For those of you not familiar with RISE, RISE is the young professionals group for the insurance industry. We offer resources for networking, career resources, monthly webinars, and more. You can check us out online at riseprofessionals.com or follow our LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. A few housekeeping items today before we get started with the webinar. Please enter questions in the Q&A section, and Austin will answer those at the end, as well as the chat. Also coming up next month, we have another webinar, 2021 Talent Strategy, Hiring for a Diverse Workforce, hosted by the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So go online to sign up for that one and check the event calendar for upcoming events. So back to today, Austin Tucker has 17 years of insurance experience and the last 15 years in risk management. Austin's currently the property risk manager for National General Insurance. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Austin.
Thank you so much, Amy. To echo Amy, good morning and good afternoon to everybody on the call, depending on where you are. Glad you're able to join us on this week before a holiday week. I know everyone's busy, but hopefully we'll make this fun and informative for everybody. So before we move in, the purpose of this was really to introduce the idea of design thinking. And what that is basically trying to teach you how to think through a problem or a need in a comprehensive and structured way. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. So as Amy had said, this is a RISE presentation. I would like to thank Amy and the rest of the RISE group for giving me this opportunity to speak to everybody today. My contact info will be at the end of this presentation, so if there are any questions that you may have that don't come up, please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you are interested, we do have an innovation committee and an education committee that I am part of both. And if you'd like to know more about those, don't hesitate to reach out to Amy or anyone else at RISE for those. So let's get started. So what is design thinking? And this is one of those kind of loaded questions that a lot of people will say, oh, I know what design thinking is, and they really don't, or they have a misconception of it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try to first give you a better idea of what design thinking is, its history, where it came from, its uses, particularly in ways that you're not quite aware that, hey, that was design thinking that created this product or this service. We'll kind of go through different models that are out there. There's not really one comprehensive model. There's actually many different models depending on what the origin of that model is, if it's from somebody like IBM or from a design academy. And then we will also look into a process so you can kind of do it on your own if you want to for an everyday problem. And then we'll wrap up with the fun stuff, which is always talk about how design thinking has failed, because everyone likes to see examples of failures because that's how we learn. So design thinking is basically using human experience as a guide for your problem-solving issues. And problem-solving is kind of a large umbrella to kind of put in. It's not necessarily have to be a problem. It could be a situation that needs to be changed. It could be the introduction of a new product. It could be anything in between a good thing and a bad thing. It's problem solving is really just a general term, and it's kind of a catch-all in this case. As we talked about, there are many forms depending on the industry. A design thinking process in the IT world will look totally different than a design thinking in a product world or a restaurant, food service world. And we'll kind of look at those a little bit too. And no true format. It's kind of make it up as you go along and find what works for you and your strengths and your team's strengths on that end. And design thinking is best to destroy the myth of Maslow's hammer. And if anyone doesn't know what Maslow's hammer is, it's basically the concept that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that was basically a approach from on philosophy that was applied to pretty much everything. It can be from psychology to medicine to whatnot. If you don't have a diverse toolbox, so we're going to keep with the tool theme for a minute. If you do not have a diverse toolbox, you're just going to basically approach everything as it needs to be just hammered down and correct and move on. It needs something that needs to be cut, sawn, sanded, whatnot. But if you have a hammer, all you can do is hit something. So design thinking gives you the tools through a process and steps and a process to basically come up with a better product or a better idea. So let's look at the history of design thinking. And this whole course was really used as a backbone or it was the backbone of this whole course, I should say. It was basically based on a 2008 Harvard Business Review article called Design Thinking by Tim Brown. What this article did is it took something that was already in existence from Tim Brown and his company IDEO and the design thinking process in the actual design world, and kind of brought it to the forefront in the mainstream of know-how. It was being used before that, as we'll see, it's been used since, but really this article is kind of what's been pointed to by multiple sources as a thing that brought it to the forefront for many companies. At the time when he wrote the article, he was the CEO, Tim Brown was the CEO of IDEO. If you go to IDEO's website now, they are still very much a design thinking company. They are contractors and they have many resources on their website that can help you if you want to get some ideas about how they approach design thinking with their clients. As we talked about, this helped popularize the concept of design thinking. Before this, it was really a process where it was done in silos. You know, a product was developed by one team, it was sent to another to engineer it, it was sent to another to develop it and market it, and then it was sent out the door, and success or failure was just kind of based on the whims of the market, whereas design thinking came in and actually applied a human approach, human empathy, human understanding to a product and needs. And the most important thing that came out of this is it debunked the idea of the creative genius or the creative lone genius. And that's really a myth that still is perpetuated pretty highly in in the business world, especially. A lot of people think somebody like, say, Steve Jobs it was somebody who created all of the Apple products that we know and use today by himself, which really he wasn't. He was a very, very small part of a very large team of individuals that created these products. He might have been the master planner, the conductor behind the scenes, kind of directing people to go someplace, but he did not sit down and create all that. Very rarely do we have that lone genius. You know, there's arguments out there that, you know, somebody like Da Vinci was probably one of the few lone geniuses, but it's hard to really say because of how far back he was, and basically all his notes kind of come back as his. So we don't really know for sure if there ever was a lone genius, but design thinking is put into place to basically destroy that myth and get that out of people's heads that they can't be the only ones that come up with an idea. You know, they can't come in there and say, I thought this from soup to nuts all by myself. It was actually you know, a team of people. Probably the most famous design thinker that we can think of here, and the one that really kind of popularized the concept of a all-around design approach, was Thomas Edison and his Menlo Park group. Tim Brown references him early on in his article from Harvard Business Review, basically stating that he did not come up with the light bulb, but he came up with a process that told people that they needed the light bulb. You know, we often think that Edison created the light bulb by himself, but he didn't. It was a team of people. But Edison came up with a process to market it, to sell it, the need to produce electricity to power the light bulb, which led to the building of, you know, the electrical infrastructure that we have now, and the creation of the DC current and the AC currents that he popularized with, I believe it was Tesla that came up with the other current. But that, besides the point, Edison, for all his grandeurs to try to say he invented all this, he did come up with the concept really of using design thinking and applying inventions to human need and creating human desire to have that invention. If you think about it, you know, if you told people I have this light bulb, they're gonna be like, well, what's it for? I have candles, we have gas powered lights, whatnot, and you know, the need wasn't there. Edison created the need. He created the environment for that device to succeed. Same thing with the phonograph. Edison originally was planning the phonograph to be used for just dictation and playback. He didn't envision recording on it for music and then for that music to be replayed again and again and again in the privacy of one's home or in a cafe or whatnot. It took several years and failures for him to realize, wait a minute, this could be used for other purposes. So just because an idea comes out initially, Edison basically was able to see that something had the ability to live on past his vision. And that's really important for design thinking, is that you may go into something thinking it's going to be A, and you may come out of it, it's actually on letter F or letter L iteration. It can be a much larger or longer process than you originally intended, or it might even go someplace you never really thought about. But that's the beauty of design thinking, is it gives you the tools and the resources to basically take your idea and actually apply it to where it'd be most successful. Talk a little bit about Steve Jobs. He's probably the most well-known design thinker that we have ever had. And we think of that, actually let me backtrack. We think that Steve Jobs basically saved Apple, and he did. After he left in the early 80s, he went on to found his own companies, including Pixar, or Saving Pixar, I should say, and the next computer company, while Apple kind of grew and then floundered and basically went to near bankruptcy before Steve Jobs came and took it over. And one of the things that Jobs did really well is that he basically took a company that was Apple and pared it down. Basically, he eliminated products, which at the time the thinking was, well, we need more products on the market. We need to apply to more people. You know, we need to satisfy everybody. Jobs got rid of that mindset. He actually took down their product lines and went from, I think it was 15 different product lines down to 3. He wanted to simplify and focus on the experience, the consumer experience. And really what he wanted to do was focus on, what do people want? You know, we know they want a computer, they need a computer, but what do they want in that computer? They want it to be attractive. They want it to be, you know, a centerpiece of a conversation. They want it to be something that people, you know, sit there and actually becomes a conversation starter. They're things that are really different. They set themselves apart when you go into a retail store. And Jobs came up with that concept, but he didn't come up with the products. He depended on other people to come in with the products. And that's where we kind of lose that sight. Unless you've read more about Steve Jobs and his time at Apple, we think that he did all this himself, but he really didn't. He actually had help. 2 particular ones that are probably really well known early on were Johnny Ives and Ron Johnson, who both helped create the design and the business process behind what Apple became, especially with the iPod and then the iPhone and then the iPad. Those 3 devices were huge, but before those were able to become reality, they had to start someplace. They had to get Apple back off the ground. That's where Johnny Ives came up with the old Macs that were colored, see-through and colored, and all in one device. That was, you know, that was his thinking. You know, Steve Jobs came in and gave critiques on the design, what he wanted, what he thought to take out, things like that. But he wanted to focus really on what Apple did well, which was create a well-known product that was known to be different and to sell it to everybody as an alternative to the PC market, which was, you know, just the beige box, big monitor, whatnot. So that's where we can start looking at design thinking as being something that was successful and is still successful to this day, though arguably not as much as when Steve Jobs was there. When Steve Jobs was there, he had that design thinking mind. His background was design oriented. He wanted to create products that looked good, functioned well. Whereas you see now with Tim Cook, who has a supply chain background, his mindset, while still focused on innovation, is more about sustainability of the products and its ability to function in the marketplace. So some popular examples for design thinking have come about. A lot of these that you'll see here come from Tim Brown's work with IDEO, and he references these in his article. One was the Keep the Change program from Bank of America. For those that are not familiar with this program, basically what this was is that every time you use your debit card, they would basically round up to the nearest dollar and take that change and put it into your savings account automatically. So every time you use your debit card, it would put in you know, money into your savings, and it was almost like a you know, a push, the concept of pushing someone by doing an automatic feature, like such like you know, 401k savings from your paycheck, or healthcare insurance being purchased out. So Bank of America had this, it was free service for the consumer, but obviously, Bank of America had their fees they would charge for using the card and whatnot that was charged to the outlet that you use the card in. But really, this concept took off because it gave people a easy and non-thinking, not a non-stressful way to save money and a very low impact on their budget, because all of a sudden, you spent 80 cent, 11.80 at the grocery store. Well, 20 cents went into your savings. And it encouraged you to use your Bank of America card more, built up your savings almost automatically. So that was an example of design thinking and a relatively pretty big success for Bank of America. IBM is the company that has made billions off of using design thinking to create products and create services. It's pretty hard to just put your finger on one service or product that IBM has created using design thinking, because there's so many of them, and a lot of them are things that we don't really see in a popular context. We might use them in the world of our everyday job, but that IBM has made a lot of money on design thinking, and they actually have a Design Academy course that anyone can take. It's free. All you have to do is just create an account. You go in and you can go through about 2/3 of the course and find out more about design thinking from the IBM perspective. You can end up getting, I think there's 6 levels. You can do 4 levels for free. The other 2, you actually have to be an IBM team member to get, but I do recommend that. And there will be a link at the end of this to that site. Uber Eats, the creation of Uber Eats was a design thinking process. Basically, Uber was looking for ways to utilize their drivers on their downtime, or to get more people in who didn't want to necessarily haul people around in their private cars, but still wanted to earn some extra cash on the side. So they created Uber Eats. And to this day, once a quarter, they send their team out. The Uber Eats team goes out into the community, talks to their partners, talks to restaurants that are not partners, and tries to find out, what's going good, what's going bad, how can they attract these people to using Uber Eats, either as a consumer or as a restaurant provider. And it's an ongoing process, which we'll show here in a little bit, that design thinking is a continuous loop. It never stops. It just because you get to one point, you go right back into it again. Airbnb is another example of the modern concept of hotel or travel stays that has been kind of turned up on its ear because of change. Airbnb basically designed the concept of using someone else's house, or someone renting their house out for travelers or business travelers. And their process, their model, the way they've done their website, their booking, everything has been done through design thinking. When the pandemic started, they were hit very hard, and by using design thinking and their process of rethinking their models, they've actually been able to turn that into a profit. And I believe they've got an IPO coming up soon. So they've done really well by using design thinking to think themselves out of their problems. In this case, the problems they had, and turning them into successes. And of course, probably the most famous design thinking is the iPhone and also the iPod. Really, the iPod is probably the bigger one of the two, where they took a already existing concept of the MP3 player and made it smaller, more attractive, more durable, and easier to use. And then to create that environment, they created iTunes, which was probably even the larger game changer of anything, because it required you to have Apple products as well. But it's one of those things where who would have thought, you had before that, MP3 players were bulky, they had low battery life, they only carry like 25 to 50 songs on them. And then Apple comes in and says, here's a iPod that's got a metal case, easy to use click wheel, and you can store 100 songs on it or 1,000 songs on it. It was just a game changer in the industry, and no one quite realized how much so until we got the iPhone, which combined both the MP3 player, a camera, and a phone all in one. So the process of design thinking. This is a quote pulled directly from Tim Brown's article. But basically, why I pulled this was basically to kind of show you that it's not really a step-by-step thing. It's not really a checklist. It's actually think of them as like design boxes. You've got your first box, your second box, your third box, fourth, fifth, however many steps that you want to create, and you have freedom to move around in that box, go any which way in that box until you feel comfortable enough that you can move out of that box into the next box. We don't want to do steps because checklists are steps and vice versa. And they kind of put that mentality into you saying, well, we can't go on to the next thing because we haven't completed these others. When you have the box concept, you can move fluidly back and forth, especially in those early stages. You can go back to the whole go back to the drawing board idea that can apply to design thinking. You want to be able to have that fluidity to move back and forth until you're comfortable enough moving on with the process. Make sure you understand the needs of the product. Make sure you understand why why you're pursuing that issue or solving that problem. Checklists are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm in risk management. Checklists are very important, but they are rigid. They cannot adapt. They cannot conform unless you go and change them and then make that change and then educate everyone on that change, why that change was made and whatnot. It's a lot easier to create basically that sandbox idea. Create that sandbox environment with design thinking so people can have that know that freedom but still have boundaries. You want to give people the freedom but not so much freedom that they kind of just are overwhelmed by it. You want to kind of give them a little bit of boundaries. So we're looking for this product within this sphere of people to apply to this situation. You kind of want to think about it that way. You don't want to just say, hey, come up with a new product to solve X problem. So think about design thinking as a series of boxes, and that's what we're kind of refer to going forward now instead of steps. And I'll try to catch myself from not saying steps, but I can't promise that I won't screw up occasionally. So we talked about earlier that there's a lot of different processes, or excuse me, a lot of different methods or models for design thinking. Here you see some of the more popular ones. You see the IBM design thinking there toward the middle. You also have Stanford's kind of the academic side. You see their model process, and you can see some other companies, including the Google Sprint design process. What's interesting about all these is they kind of have a core understand, or to have a core meanings between each step, or somewhere in between each step, and that's where I think we should probably focus our energy on. This is going to be again taken from Tim Brown's article. We're going to simplify what you see here on this screen, and basically it's going to be 3 eyes, and you'll see here in a minute. But we wanted to basically make it easy to remember and comfortable, make it comfortable for you to use. So the process of design thinking we're going to talk about, as opposed to what we just saw, is basically these 3 steps. It's inspiration, ideation, implement, and then start over again. So these are your 3 boxes that you're going to play in. What's the inspiration? What's the ideate, the inspiration, and then how do you implement it? And now there's a lot of sub-steps in each one of those boxes, and we'll kind of talk about those a little bit. But know that those are your main areas, and they're a little less threatening. They're a little easier to remember, and it's a circle, which kind of gives everyone, for some reason, circles have always been comforting to people. So there you go, you have a circle. So let's talk about the process. Hold on, I need to move something here. Okay. So any project using design thinking, you should expect, as we talked about, to be able to move back and forth through the steps, especially the first 2 steps. You want to make sure that you are comfortable jumping from ideation back in inspiration and inspiration into ideation. There's no shame in going back and forth multiple times, many times. That's because it shows that you are working through your problems, working through your issues with the product or the service, and not just running with the first thing you get because you want to be done with it. It's important that you are comfortable before you move into the implementation phase, because that's where a lot of capital and a lot of time is spent. we go. I was an English major, and so one of the things that they told you early on, especially in the creative writing process, is to kill your darlings. It's a terrible phrase, but it makes sense. You write something, you're passionate about it, it's something that you created from nothing, from just the the recesses of your own mind, and then you go give it to your professor, and they mark it up with red ink and say, try again. And you can be heartbroken by it, and it can hurt your feelings, it can make you feel defensive. So in the process of design thinking, expect to be heartbroken. You're going to have this, what you think is a great idea, something that you stayed up all night thinking about, or wrote out on spent 2 hours writing out on a whiteboard, the whole process, all this, and it works out that none of it works. Expect to be heartbroken. Don't take it personally. It's just business. The paraphrase the Godfather there, it's just business. It's not, you're trying to get to a end point, so don't take things, don't take critiques or criticism personally. They're just trying, everyone's there trying to create a better product or a better service for everybody. Same thing, learn to let go. If someone has an idea and it's not work, it's a bad idea or it doesn't work, whatnot, just let it go. After you talk about it and realize it's done, don't shame that person for thinking of that idea. Don't tell them, oh, it's not as bad as what Johnny thought of or whatever. Don't do that. You're going to have your own bad ideas, and the best way to create a nurturing and safe environment is just to say, let's find the best idea, let's move on, or write it down and say, we'll save it for later because it might come back and help. So that's probably, those are two key areas that you need to remember. So let's talk about the process, the first box, inspiration. So obviously you want to know, what is the blank? Is it a problem or is it an opportunity? Is it the problem a lack of service, the current service, or a service that needs to go away and be replaced? Or is it an opportunity? Do we see a rising need in the marketplace for technology, for a service, for something to assist a customer? Know what you're going in there first for. Don't just go in telling people, again, don't give them such a blank slate that they kind of freeze up. You want to tell them, look, we've got this problem, we need to solve it, and help me find a way. Next thing you need to know is, can it be changed? It's kind of like saying, can we make water not be wet? The whole dry cleaning idea, that kind of threw people off. Can the problem really be changed? Is it something that really needs to be addressed, or is it something that can be addressed at a later date? Is it something that really, is this just a pet project for someone who wants to keep people busy or put their name on something, or is it something that really needs to be addressed? And if the problem can be changed, how much can you change it? And by changing it, is it something that's going to really make a difference? You don't want to change something in such a minute thing people don't notice, or it might, it kind of goes kind of off on the wayside and it goes off to die, which was going to do, the idea or product or service was going to do anyway. But you also want to make sure that you're changing it enough to make a difference and not upset the status quo, that people are going to accept it and say, oh, that was a great idea, I'm glad it went to this, or I'm glad this got changed up. Those are a really good example. Is the first iPhone was on a very old network, and then they moved it to the 3G network. Basically, it was the same iPhone. They just changed the internal workings, but they made a big deal about, now it's a 3G iPhone, and that was huge. And actually, and they were able to mark up the price on it too. And that was a lack of really hindsight on the Apple part. But they fixed the problem, and they came back and said, okay, it's done. Here it is. Oh, we're going to charge you more for it, and people buy it up. So expect, if you're going to change something, make sure you change it enough to make a difference on the product. And some things to know before you go: know who's involved, who are the stakeholders in this. So when you're developing that thing, what's a problem or opportunity? Know who's involved, especially internally. Is it going to be in the accounting department, marketing department, design department, engineering, whatnot? Who needs to be involved in that process. You don't necessarily have to get them involved right away, but make sure you start having a list. And with design thinking, it is a team-based approach, so it doesn't hurt to bring someone from those teams in to help give their ideas into these issues. Know what the reason for the problem is. Again, there's a problem Is that something that needs to be changed, or is it someone just saying, trying to keep people busy or justify something going on? And this is probably the most important. What are the resources that would be needed to fix the problem? Is it something that you already have on hand, or is it something that needs to be asked for, budgeted for? Is it technology? Is it is it a third-party vendor that you might need to bring in? Is it an education opportunity where people need to get training first? Know exactly what resources are needed before you pursue this, because you don't want to get halfway through the process and realize you don't have the skill set or the materials to actually implement the change that you want to make happen. So let's move on to box 2, ideation. This is where we start getting to the fun stuff. So brainstorm. Make sure your people are comfortable with silence. That's one of my favorite things about the ideation process, is just kind of sitting around and thinking, going for a walk. There's many studies out there showing different activities that can help generate ideas into someone's mind. It's going for walks, it's doing solving puzzles, doing something different, and all of a sudden you get that light bulb moment. You're like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. And make sure they have a pen and paper handy with them so they can write down their idea, because I don't remember my own ideas unless I write them down. So make sure people, the simple pen and paper, pencil and paper are magical when you tell people, hey, go off and think about this. And also go in and come back, and we're going to throw everyone's ideas on the board, and you get 1 minute to talk about your ideas, and another minute for us to ask questions, or however you want to structure it. But make sure the group is comfortable with brainstorming. A lot of people are not. They're not comfortable with that idea of getting together and thinking quietly or quietly on their own or whatnot. No distractions. One of the most important things about design thinking that you'll find that's kind of a common tool across all the models that we have available is to be able to tell stories. You want to be able to empathize with your audience, with your customer, on why they need this product or what problem they're having. And the best way to do that is through telling a story. The empathy part is becoming huge. Empathy is becoming huge in just the business world these days. So being able to tell a story and basically humanize the experience is a huge thing that can translate beyond the design thinking process. Keep everyone internally, know what's going on. This doesn't necessarily have to mean like, you send out a company-wide email telling people what you're doing, but make sure the key stakeholders know what's going on and where the process is. And if you have a sponsor for the committee or whatnot, make sure that they're in the know and that they are on, you can tell them, hey, we have this and we think we might need this resource or this, this tool or this vendor to bring in, so they're aware and they can make sure the funds are available for that to happen or the resources available for that to happen, and it doesn't slow down the creative process. And that kind of leads into this one. Don't be afraid to bring in others. We'll look at a couple examples later on where they actually brought in others only after the process was done, and it ended up hurting them pretty badly. But make sure you bring in outside experts and customers, especially, to kind of test the product. You're starting to see a lot more companies now doing the blind taste test, or bring in a third-party marketing company to talk about a service or whatnot. That's where this idea comes in. They want to test it and see if this idea has resonance with its customer base. And then outside experts, somebody like IDEO, or even a data analytics company to bring in some data. Make sure you bring them in and you know what purpose you're bringing them in. You're not just bringing them in because you think they'll be able to help you. You want to make sure that you have a true purpose of why they're there. And then test more. Take your idea, whether it be a prototype or just a whiteboard, with sticky notes on it. Test the product, make it flow, move things around, test it from different angles, different steps in the process to make sure it all works well, because you don't want to get to the implementation phase where, again, capital and time is going to be a great drain on. It's going to be a great drain on both those items when you have something that you haven't tested on paper first. So some things to know before you go. Again, this is where the lone genius idea that we talked about earlier gets destroyed. You can't have someone brainstorming all this by themselves. You need to make sure everyone is bringing their best ideas and their best thinking to the table. You can't let one person take over the whole thing and basically, be the one that says yes or no on people's ideas. It's okay to have a moderator, but you want to have someone that you don't want someone to come in and say, it's my idea and this is the way we're going to do it. That's probably the first thing that needs to go on that end. Prepare to have lots of ideas. And it kind of goes back to there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as a bad idea when you're trying to solve a problem or go through the design thinking process. Make sure you come, no matter how silly it may sound, bring it to the table. And so it might be able to be paired with someone else's idea and create a good product or service. And then, as we talked about before, be prepared to kill your ideas. It might be something you hold dear. You've been holding on to this idea for years, maybe, and you get in there and it just doesn't work. It's okay. Hang on to it still. There might be another time and place down the road for it. And keep an open mind. I think everyone can kind of agree on that one. Don't badger someone over an idea. Don't say no to something just because you don't like it. Hear things out. Create that active listening environment so everyone is on the same page with what someone's talking about, and then they're open to suggestions. And they're not 86ing an idea because that's something that they would never have thought of. And I think it's silly or stupid. Box 3. So implementation. This is where, again, capital and time is going to be spent heavily. So first you want to create a prototype, and this is where you kind of send it off to an engineering or design group or whatnot to kind of create that prototype depending on what you're designing, and test it. And if the tests don't work, go back to the ideation stage, figure out what didn't work, and then go back to implementation once you kind of fix those problems. Create the vision and execute it. You've kind of created the vision in the ideation phase. Now you need to execute that vision. What resources are you going to use? How's this going to be rolled out? Is it going to be internal? Is it going to be external? It's all key to understanding how does this vision get out into the public or get into the marketplace, whether it be internal, external. Here's where you start bringing in other departments. Make sure you have a marketing department that has the capacity to help you and that they help you create a marketing strategy. Now, you might have someone on the team that is part of the marketing department that can help you with that, or you just alert the marketing department beforehand saying, hey, we're getting close to needing a strategy on this, so we're going to bring you in and catch you up on where we are. It's up to you on when you want to bring them in, but that's if you are going to be marketing this product, especially externally to customers, it's something you need to do. You need to create. This is kind of important. It's really overlooked. Is to tell the market why it needs this product or service. You see a lot of successful products tell you why you need it. They create the need for it. They're not. The market isn't out there demanding. The market was never demanding an iPhone. The market was never demanding a service to have your food delivered to you outside of just the restaurant you were ordering from. Things like that. Kind of tell the market, hey, you really need this product, and this is why. And that's kind of the hard part. And that's where it might be good to kind of make sure you're testing the product really well and make sure that the marketplace that you want it to be in is the best fit for it. It might actually be another marketplace for it. And some things to know before you go on this one. Prepare to go backwards, as we talked about. Be prepared to jump back into ideation or even to implementation if you need to. Again, it's a fluid circle. Feel free to move around to make sure things are working the way you want them to, or do they need to, before you move on with them. Make sure you have alerted all the possible departments that you will be needed. If they're not on the team and aware of what's going on, make sure that they are aware that they will be needed at a certain point, and then make sure that they have the resources and the capacity to do that. And also know when to just take a step back and observe. Sometimes we get caught up in the weeds of a lot of things and we can't quite see we need to actually take a step back and kind of look and see what's going on. So don't be afraid to take a step back and say, you know what, I'm going to back off for a minute and just kind of watch. I need to get a better idea of what's going on here from, just from an outsider perspective or just from a further distance away, both literally and figuratively. So we kind of go into innovation as part of the design thinking process. And what you see here is really the innovation process. And you see design thinking kind of fits in the first few steps of that. You always want to begin at the beginning. We talked about taking a human approach. Always make sure that you are leading with the the human, empathizing the human experience on that. Try the product or try the service early and often. That's probably one of the biggest things I can emphasize on this is test early, test often. As someone who's gone through the ideation phase personally multiple times on different products or services, you want to make sure that you are trying it early and often, because there's nothing more disheartening and embarrassing than going to a certain stage and saying, oh, this isn't working, or oh, you know what, we didn't think this whole way through. It's much better to test it early and just pull the plug than have the plug pulled later on. Don't be afraid to seek outside help. Make sure you budget for the pace of innovation. This is big. We talked about how the last phase is heavy on use of capital. Make sure you have enough capital at the beginning to fund, especially that ideation phase. Make sure you have enough funding there, and actually probably need to over budget for it to make sure that you have enough resources. If a certain service is needed or certain product is needed, that you have those funds available. Make sure you find the right talent. We talked about bringing in different people from different areas to see, to tell them, hey, we need marketing help, we need engineering help, we need outside help as a vendor or whatnot on this area. Find that talent so it can assist you. Don't think you can do it all yourself or you'll be able to learn this process. Bring in someone who is that SME, that subject matter expert to help you. And then to make the design for the cycle. You want to make sure that the design is able to go back into the cycle of design thinking after you're done, because things are going to need to change. We're not still using a 3G iPhone. We're using, I think what the iPhone 12 just came out. I mean, the product, just because it's finished doesn't mean it can't be improved. So make sure the product has the ability to go back into that cycle. Same thing with the service. Make sure that that service can go back into the cycle to be improved or critiqued, and that could be through text mining. It could be through internal polling, customer surveys, things like that, where you kind of get some of that data on where to go back into the product life cycle, or the design thinking life cycle, excuse me, to improve that product the next time around. So design thinking, as it helps innovation succeed. Innovation is great, but you need to go through the design thinking process to make it work. Otherwise, it's you're thinking of a lot of great ideas, but what application do they have? Here in insurance, I know we can all think of examples where someone's like, I've got this great innovative idea for a service or a need, but it's not really thought out. It's just something that they think, oh, they see an opportunity, but it's not really, excuse me, not thought out. Many ideas and innovation die in the process of creating them. If you ever get a chance to actually sit in on an innovation webinar or go to especially an InsurTech conference, if you look at the vendors that are there, peddling their wares, their services, whatnot on the trade show floor, there's a pretty good chance that 20% to a quarter of them will be not there the next year because their idea just didn't take off, and that's fine. I mean, that's the entrepreneurial way, but just realize that the innovation process takes out a lot, and what you see there on the floor when you go through those areas or in that webinar, that might be the the 20th iteration of that idea from that company. So just something to keep in mind. And design thinking is a really good way to kind of vet ideas. I think that's kind of the undervalued use of design thinking, is that you can get an idea and you can kind of run it through a quick and dirty design thinking process, especially those first two steps, especially the ideation part. That's where you kind of sit there and say, okay, well, we've got this, because you have the service or you have the idea, but how can you ideate it? Can it be grown out from a service? What would it need? What would it need to succeed? That's where you kind of, the rubber meets the road, for lack of a better term. All right, so let's talk about everyone's favorite thing. Let's talk about some failures. And we have two examples here, but what you see here is kind of a list of failures of how something went through the design process, but didn't necessarily succeed. I'm not gonna go through the whole list. You can kind of read them for yourselves there. But what you want to know is that if you don't follow the process through the steps, or if you make assumptions, or you kind of come in and say, you know what, I got this, I know what I'm doing. We don't need to talk to customers. We don't need to, you know, inquire about a service or see if someone else has a service or has tried a service already. You know, that can really go back to hurt you on it. So the first design thinking failure we're going to talk about is one from around I believe it was around 2010, 2011 timeframe. Frito-Lay created, the makers of Sun Chips, created a compostable bag, basically a way to put the bag into a compost bin, and within 11 weeks, it'd be gone. The bag was made out of plant polymers, and it was, you know, Sun Chips always marketed itself as a healthy, earth-based alternative. But the problem was, is the bag was loud. It was louder than other bags because it was a thicker material. And you know, they spent a lot of money. They had a Super Bowl ad to announce the launch of this. They put a lot of money and marketing into it. And it quickly got a lot of negative publicity, basically for how loud it was. People were claiming it was louder than jet engines. People were saying it was louder than, you know, putting two regular bags on your feet and jumping around on them. I'm not sure how they tested that, but they claimed that. There was a Facebook page started called "I Can't Hear You Over My Sun Chips Bag" that actually garnered almost 50,000 likes and followers. And there were YouTube videos made about how loud these bags were. None of it was good. And so Frito-Lay basically pulled all the product. They composted all the bags themselves, and you can't find anything around. And we went straight back to having the normal plastic bags that you have today for Sun Chips and all chips, really. And what this post-event thing is kind of telling people now is that Frito-Lay was just ahead of its time, probably by several years, and they didn't really read the marketplace right. They kind of had their own internal backslapping and brother-in-lawing coming in and saying, you know what, this is a great idea. You know, people will love this, and they didn't really test it. They did some focus groups, but they really didn't test it on the marketplace in many markets. And all of a sudden they launch it, spent a lot of money. I looked, I couldn't find an exact figure how much they spent, but you know, you can guarantee it was in the high hundreds of millions to launch this. And they just dropped the ball on it. They were basically way ahead of the curve on it. If they launched it today with our little more eco awareness, they would probably do well with it, but it wasn't meant to be, and it will probably never be. No company will try a compostable bag now because of basically this experience from Sun Chips. And this one's kind of my favorite one. So in the early 80s, A&W restaurants, makers of A&W root beer, they wanted to compete with McDonald's, so they created a third pound burger, and they thought it was just a little bit more expensive. It wasn't much. It was I think it was less than 50 cents more than the McDonald's quarter pounder. And they marketed it as such. And why it failed is because, well, people are bad at math. Because basically they saw the quarter pounder, which is 1/4, and then they saw the A&W, which was 1/3, third pound, fourth pound. And they thought, well, 3 is less than 4, so I'm getting less, I'm paying more for less at A&W, where I can go to McDonald's and make, get a better deal with a quarter pounder of burger. And that burger lasted a few months and it was gone. And what the issue was, and I actually put a link in the, here in a minute, you'll see some resources. There's a link into several articles and case studies about this. Basically what they did is that internally they talked it through and they thought it was a great idea, but no one bothered to test the marketplace on it. No one went to go even just get a focus group and make sure people understood basic fractions. So this idea failed miserably, and they pulled it. And if you think people are smarter now, McDonald's rolled out their own third-pound burger back in 2006-7 timeframe, and that failed as well. It failed to sell because people, it was even they marketed it as the Angus beef burger and all that, higher quality meat, whatnot, still failed because they could not, people could not get their mind wrapped around that a fourth is actually less than a third on that. So again, the idea that people understand everything. They didn't take that human experience, that they didn't empathize with people who don't basically know math. I mean, it's sad to say, but it's a great idea. It's dollar value, but people just didn't get it. So here's just some resources. We kind of referenced a lot of these going through. This will be this link will be available, or this page will be available with these links. Later, we'll send it out to everybody on the call, but these are just links to anything we talked about on this call and some other things we didn't get a chance to cover. But do encourage you, if this is something you're interested in. I've done the IBM design thinking course, highly recommend it. It helped kind of open my eyes to the design thinking process. It's a little more SaaS approach than a product approach, especially for the insurance field, but it still gives you that kind of thinking through a service or a product and make sure it works. And then some of these are articles that I do encourage you to read. They're not too long, but they're good resources. So I'll check the questions box here in a second, but if there are any questions that pop up after this, there's my email address, and also you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to drop me a line or just connect. I'm happy to help out however I can on that end. So let's see if we have any questions pop up. Nope, no questions. We've got about 9 minutes left. So something I'll kind of give everyone as a takeaway on this is that the design thinking process doesn't necessarily have to be something that is a large project or a game-changing product. It could be something that could be as simple as just the way you do your everyday work. It could be something like the 2-monitor system that everyone takes for granted nowadays. That was a design thinking process. I remember when I first started insurance, you had 1 monitor, and if you wanted a second one, you hoped you had a laptop, and then you have your laptop open and a monitor next to it. And that's if you had a laptop. If you had a desktop, you just had the 1 monitor. And then first, I don't know what company started it first, but it kind of caught on like wildfire, and we started seeing dual monitors on everyone's desk. And that became like a selling point for a while for companies on their recruitment. Is that, oh, we have 2 monitors to make your work easier and more efficient. It's silly, especially nowadays, but back back when I first started, it was revolutionary. I mean, it was a major deal. The same thing with the paperless office. I know some people have had bad experiences with paperless offices, but when I first started in insurance, they actually just made a change to paperless office, and it was great. And actually, that's how I got started. And then I changed cities and went to a different office that was a straight paper office, and it was kind of blowing my mind that there was stacks and stacks of files on my desk. Full, 3-4 inches thick. When before all I had to do was just, if once I got like a letter in or a statement of work or something like that, I could just, I would put my stamp on it. I put it in the go scan box, and then 2 days later it would be in my my file digitally. So there's things that we take for granted now that were actually design thinking processes before. So don't be afraid to think, oh, I can improve my work day, or I can improve my team performance by doing, this, or by implementing this strategy, or just bringing in this, this office supply. It could be something as simple as that. So don't be afraid to, by the size of your idea. If it's something very small, don't worry about it. Small things, great things have small beginnings. So just work on those ideas, and we'll, if you want to talk through it with somebody, I'm happy to talk through it. I'm not going to go, steal your idea or anything like that, but feel free to, or ask around to other people, see if they have some of the same issues. So.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Austin. I thought that this was very helpful, great content, and a lot to think about as we're going back into our everyday work and things that we can think about implementing. If you do have questions, like Austin said, feel free to reach out to him directly. His info is up on the screen. And take a look at our YouTube for this recording and check out the Rise Professionals website for upcoming events. Thank you all for joining us today.
All right, thank you, everybody.